He entered the courtroom like a ghost stitched together by war and time. Shackled at the wrists, face lined with the ash-gray trails of forgotten years, yet something in his silence screamed louder than the gavel ever could. Before the judge even glanced at his name, the air in the room tightened, like history was about to exhale after decades of holding its breath. "Name?" the clerk asked. His voice barely rose above a whisper, cracking like dry leaves beneath boots. "Mason Quinn, Gunnery Sergeant, U.S. Marine Corps, retired." Nobody in that courtroom could have predicted what those words would unleash. Judge Rebecca Langston skimmed through the case file with routine detachment until her eyes froze mid-page. Her fingers hesitated, her complexion drained to ivory. That name. It belonged to the same man who had once carried her older sister out of a hellfire ambush in Mosul, vanished into obscurity, never to be seen again. Mason Quinn, age 71, sat hunched like a question mark on the defendant's bench, draped in a tattered Army-issue coat 3 decades past its prime. Under the antiseptic hum of courtroom lights, the crevices in his face seemed to deepen into ravines of unspoken memories. He had once worn dress blues pinned with honors. Now his outfit came courtesy of a Goodwill bin in desperation. The court clerk called, "Case 12, C, City of Harrington versus Mason Quinn. Charges: disorderly conduct, trespassing, resisting detainment." He rose like a creaking relic, joints stiffened by war trauma and forgotten medical charts. First Afghanistan, then Iraq. Visible wounds, invisible ones, all carried silently like medals he never asked to wear. The prosecutor, a young, pressed, and gleaming man named Cole Harriman, stood with a rehearsed smirk. "Mr. Quinn has been warned repeatedly about loitering behind the Franklin Street Bistro. The owner has filed 3 separate complaints this month alone. What he didn't say was this: Mason never panhandled, never asked for anything. He just sat near the steaming kitchen vent at night, trying to keep his bones from freezing to the concrete when the cold came crawling." Then came the officer's account. Found at 11:40 p.m., huddled behind the bistro, refused to leave. But Mason hadn't refused, he'd softly asked for 5 more minutes. Just long enough to finish a sandwich a sympathetic line cook had passed him through the back door. But his words didn't matter then, and they still didn't now. "Your Honor," Harriman continued smoothly, "this is his 3rd infraction this year. We recommend 30 days community service and a no trespassing order across the downtown district. Such an order would exile Mason from the one overnight shelter that hadn't already barred him. It would cut him off from donated meals, sanctuary from the church basement, a place to sleep without waking up iced over. It would leave him alone, entirely, as winter sharpened its teeth." "Mr. Quinn," Judge Langston finally addressed, her voice carefully neutral, "do you have legal counsel today?" He shook his head. His court-appointed attorney had been yanked into another courtroom mid-morning for an emergency trial. "Would you like to speak on your own behalf?" she asked, peering over her glasses. Mason cleared his throat. His words came out like gravel in the wind. "No excuses, ma'am. Just needed somewhere warm." "Why there?" the judge pressed, her voice flat but her eyes flickering. He paused, reluctant. "Lucaste cook sometimes brings leftovers. Known him since he was a teenager. His mom served with me. Gulf War. And your service?" she asked again, breaking court routine, her tone cracking slightly. "United States Marines," Mason replied, straightening a little. 1972 to 94, Gunnery Sergeant, 1st Battalion, the 7th of Marchins, Fallujah, Mosul. The words dropped like anchors. Years of buried honor found air in the stale courtroom. She made a quick mark on the file and kept reading, but something in Quinn's military history tripped her breath. Just then, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. A sharply dressed man in a midnight suit walked in briskly, his shoes clicking like a metronome of urgency. He reached the defense table, unclipped his leather briefcase, and faced the bench with composed authority. "Your Honor," Marcus read, "I've been retained to represent Mr. Quinn." Quinn blinked, confused. He hadn't contacted a lawyer, couldn't afford one. especially not one with cufflinks and a pocket square. This is unusual, Judge Langston said, eyes narrowed. The court received no notice of new counsel. Very recent development, Reed replied smoothly. I request a short recess to confer with my client. Langston scrutinized both men. Her expression revealed nothing. 15-minute recess, she said, rising and vanishing into chambers. Mason leaned toward the suited stranger. I don't have a cent for this. You won't need one, Reed murmured back. My firm, Reed, Lowell and Langston, is handling this pro bono. Mason squinted at the name. Langston? Like the judge? Exactly like the judge, Reed replied. Inside her office, Judge Rebecca Langston removed her glasses with trembling hands. 2 decades behind the bench had made her iron, but this moment pierced straight through her steel. It can't be the same man, she whispered. But the facts were undeniable. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a faded photograph. A younger her, beaming beside her sister Lieutenant Jenna Langston in full Marine dress. Her arm proudly looped around her shoulders. Behind the photo sat Jenna's final letter from Iraq, its corners worn soft by years of private mourning. In the letter, Jenna had written of a brutal firefight on the outskirts of Mosul. Their unit was pinned down. Then came Gunnery Sergeant Mason Quinn, charging through gunfire like a ghost out of fury, dragging a wounded private back to safety, holding the line alone while others escaped. If not for him, Jenna had written, none of us would have made it out. 2 weeks later, Jenna had been killed by a roadside bomb. She remembered the funeral house silence, buried her parents faster than the casket, the folding of the flag, the rifle cracks that echoed like broken promises, and the Marine who approached her afterward with eyes hollowed by war. Your sister saved my life, he had said. I was the one she carried. He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. That memory never left her, and neither did his name, Mason Quinn. Years ago, Judge Rebecca Langston had tried to track him down desperate to know more about Jenna's final moments. But the military told her he'd redeployed almost immediately. Later came word of his discharge, severe PTSD, a traumatic brain injury, and then nothing, vanished, until now. 20 years later, the ghost she'd searched for sat quietly in her courtroom, unknowingly closer than ever. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Marcus Reed stepped inside, concern painting his usually unreadable face. Rebecca, what is this? As her late husband's law partner and a lifelong friend, he was one of the only people who still called her by name. It's him, Marcus, she said, gesturing toward the photograph on her desk. The Marine who saved Jenna. The man who dragged her from that ambush. Marcus froze. His features stiffened as understanding spread across them. That homeless vet from court this morning? He swallowed. That's Mason Quinn? The same man you've been searching for all these years? She nodded slowly. His record confirms it. Mosul, 2005. Same unit as Jenna. He received the Silver Star for the exact operation she wrote about in her final letter. Does he know who you are? Marcus asked. I doubt it, she said. I married Thomas Langston after law school. Changed my name. He wouldn't recognize me now, not after 2 decades. She took a shaky breath, trying to anchor herself. How does a man like that, someone who saved lives, end up here? Alone, cold, on trial for trying to stay warm? Marcus shook his head, the weight of it settling in his shoulders. In the little time we spoke, I saw enough. Severe PTSD after his last tour. His wife left while he was still deployed. His benefits got tangled in the system. He did contracting work until his injuries made it impossible. After that, job loss, eviction, homelessness. Rebecca closed her eyes. In her mind, she heard Jenna's voice again echoing from that final letter. Quinn's the best of us. He'd risk everything for his brothers. If I ever become half the Marine he is, I'll have done something right. You could recuse yourself, Marcus offered gently. No one would question it. No, she said, sharp and certain. I'm not letting him disappear again. You understand the ethical complications? I do, she replied, straightening. But ethics go both ways, Marcus. Especially when it comes to those who gave everything for this country. When Judge Langston returned to the courtroom, her exterior was flawless posture, rigid, voice even, expression unreadable. But those who knew her might have noticed her hands, the faint tremble as she shuffled her papers. "Mr. Reed," she said with judicial calm, "has your client made a decision?" Marcus stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We're moving for full dismissal of all charges. Mr. Quinn wasn't trespassing, was trying to survive an Arctic-level freeze. Furthermore, we can demonstrate that employees of the restaurant gave implied permission for him to remain on site." The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but Langston raised her hand. He hesitated, then went quiet. "I have questions for the defendant," she said, voice neutral but slightly pressed. Her eyes turned toward Mason. "Mr. Quinn, your file confirms you served in Mosul in 2005. Is that accurate?" Mason sat straighter. Years of command instincts returned in a flash. "Yes, ma'am. 1st Battalion, the 7th of Marchines." "And on the 11th of March," she continued, "were you stationed near the Al-Khazir supply route?" Confusion flickered briefly across Mason's face, like a memory trying to surface through fog. "Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a convoy. Got ambushed. During that firefight," she asked carefully, "did you extract a wounded officer, Lieutenant Jenna Monroe, under enemy fire?" The entire room seemed to pause. Mason's eyes narrowed, the name burrowing deep. Dusty recollections began to stir. "Monroe," he said quietly. "Yes, young officer, brave. Took a round trying to drag a wounded corpsman to safety." His voice lowered to a murmur as he recounted the memory. "I reached her, pulled her behind the barrier. She kept yelling at me to leave her go help the others, told me to save someone who had a chance." In the gallery, a silver-haired man in a dark blazer bearing the Marine Corps League emblem leaned forward. His attention sharpened. "And what became of Lieutenant Monroe?" Judge Langston asked, her tone even though emotion churned beneath. "We got her on the medevac," Mason answered. "She made it to Ramstein, I heard. But her convoy hit an IED 2 weeks later." His voice cracked. "I always wondered if saving her just delayed the inevitable. Maybe I shouldn't have pulled her out at all." Before anyone could respond, the silver-haired Marine in the gallery stood up. "That's him," he said loudly, pointing. "That's Gunnery Sergeant Quinn. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day." The courtroom rustled with whispers. Judge Langston tapped her gavel, but the strike lacked its usual sharpness. "Order," she said. The word floated more plea than command. Mason kept his gaze low, visibly uncomfortable beneath the sudden attention. The older Marine stayed standing, his voice unwavering. "Your Honor, I don't mean to interrupt, but I was there. Quinn didn't just carry that lieutenant. He ran straight into enemy fire, took shrapnel, refused evac. Bought us enough time to get out alive." The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, while Mr. Quinn's service is admirable, it doesn't pertain to the current charges." Judge Langston's voice sliced through like cold steel. "The court disagrees. It is absolutely relevant." She placed her gavel down not with authority but with intent. "This court will recess for 10 minutes. Then she turned toward the bailiff. "Please see that Mr. Quinn remains seated," Judge Langston told the bailiff. But as she turned to step down from the bench, she paused, something rare for her. Her gaze drifted toward Mason Quinn, and for the first time, their eyes truly locked. "Mr. Quinn," she said softly, her voice stripped of its gavel, wielding authority. "When I return, there are matters far beyond this case we need to discuss." Inside her chambers, the polished armor of Judge Langston shattered. She pressed trembling fingers against her lips, as though physically holding back 20 years of tightly sealed grief. After several long breaths, she picked up the phone. "Colonel Harper? It's Rebecca Langston." "Yes, I know it's been a while. I need a favor. And I need it now." Exactly 10 minutes later, she returned to the courtroom, but not alone. 3 Marines followed behind her. A full colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal carrying a polished mahogany case. The sight of dress blues and gleaming insignias sent gasps rippling across the courtroom. Mason stood instinctively. His joints cracked in protest, but his spine straightened, and his chin lifted. Muscle memory had beaten back the years. Judge Langston took her seat, but this time she didn't reach for her glasses. Instead, she placed them aside symbolically and intentionally. For the first time in her judicial career, She didn't speak as the law. She spoke as a woman. "Before we proceed," she said clearly, "I must disclose a personal connection to this case." Her gaze fixed on Mason. "The Lieutenant Jenna Monroe you mentioned earlier, that was my sister." Gasps rose like a tide. Mason's brow tightened, recognition dawning slowly. The room thickened with tension. "20 years ago," she continued, "my sister wrote home about a gunnery sergeant who saved her life in Mosul. She said he ran through enemy fire after she'd been shot, dragged her to safety, then stayed behind to cover the rest of the unit during the evacuation." Her voice held steady, but her eyes glistened. "That man was you, Gunnery Sergeant Mason Quinn." From the gallery, the silver-haired Marine stood again. "It's true," he said. "I saw it with my own eyes. Quinn took 2 bullets to get her out of there." Judge Langston nodded subtly. 2 weeks later, Jenna was killed by an IED. At her funeral, several Marines came to speak with us. They honored her bravery, but also spoke of the man who gave us those 2 final weeks with her. Time we never would have had otherwise. Now, her eyes locked on Mason. "After her death, I tried to find you. But the Corps said you'd redeployed. Years later, I learned you'd been discharged, but no one could tell me where you'd gone." Mason remained silent. His face didn't hide the storm regret, disbelief, buried honor surfacing at last. "I never stopped looking," she said quietly. "And now, whether by fate or something higher, you walked into my courtroom." She turned to the colonel beside her. "This is Colonel James Harper," she said. "He commanded Jenna's unit, and he has something to say." Colonel Harper stepped forward with practiced precision. "Gunnery Sergeant Quinn," he began, "the Marine Corps has been trying to find you for some time. Your file was among thousands reviewed during the Veterans Reassessment Initiative." He continued, "New intelligence from your deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan warranted an official update to both your commendations and benefits." The corporal beside him opened the polished case. Inside, nestled on deep navy velvet, gleamed a medal that drew audible reactions from every corner of the courtroom. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," Harper announced, "in recognition of extraordinary heroism on the 11th of March, 2005, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Gunnery Sergeant Mason Quinn, United States Marine Corps." The courtroom gasped. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor, a distinction reserved for the rarest courage. "Until recently, the details of your mission were classified," Colonel Harper continued. "But your actions that day didn't just save Lieutenant Monroe and 5 Marines. They disrupted an ambush that would have destroyed the entire convoy. Your previous Silver Star has been officially upgraded." Mason's jaw tightened. His throat worked to speak, but only silence came. Then, finally, "There's gotta be some mistake," he said hoarsely. "I didn't do anything special. I just did my job." "No mistake, Sergeant," Harper replied, voice resolute. "And this recognition is long overdue." From the gallery, a voice thundered out with sharp precision. "Attention on deck!" The silver-haired Marines snapped to attention. One by one, veterans, officers, even civilians rose to their feet. Some saluted, others simply stood unmoving, solemn, and reverent. Soon, the entire courtroom was on its feet. Even the prosecutor rose, trapped between protocol and human decency. Judge Langston wiped at her cheek, finally unable to contain the tears. Her voice wavered as she delivered the next words. "In light of these extraordinary developments," she said, "all charges against Gunnery Sergeant Mason Quinn are hereby dismissed." She slammed the gavel down with force. "This courtroom is adjourned." As murmurs and movement began to return to the chamber, the Master Sergeant stepped toward Mason, a tablet in hand. "Sir," he said, "we've also located your VA file. There were significant errors. Your disability rating has now been reassessed 100% service-connected, effective retroactively to your original discharge." Mason blinked, stunned. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," the Master Sergeant replied, "you're entitled to full back pay, complete medical benefits, housing assistance, education coverage. Anything you need from here forward." Marcus Reed stepped beside him, voice firm with purpose. "Our firm will personally make sure every last piece of it Marcus Reed finished firmly. No more delays, no more red tape. From the back of the courtroom, a quiet voice rose. Jimothy, a line cook who used to leave sandwiches behind the Franklin Street bistro, stepped forward, his face flushed with emotion. "My dad used to tell me stories," he said, voice trembling, "about a Marine who saved his whole platoon." Jimmy's eyes locked on Mason. "He told me, if you ever meet a man named Mason Quinn, you owe him everything." Jimmy extended a hand, tears trailing down his cheeks. "I never knew that man was you. Not until today." Even the prosecutor, visibly moved, approached with hesitation. "Sir, too, had no idea. Please, accept my apology for how this case was handled." Mason stood there at the center of it all, the quiet hum of honor rising around him like an anthem unsung. His back straighter, his presence no longer shadowed, decades of buried dignity returning to him, breath by breath. Judge Langston stepped down from the bench. There was no robe between them now. No bench. No law. Just two people, standing in the wreckage and grace of what life had built and broken. "My sister once told us what you said to her that day," Olivia began softly. "You told her, 'No Marine gets left behind. Not while I'm still breathing.'" Her voice tightened, full of meaning. "Today, Gunnery Sergeant Quinn, we finally keep that promise to you." 2 weeks later, Mason stood in front of a mirror inside a small, warm apartment, this new home, part of a housing initiative created for veterans like him. The space was modest, quiet, clean, a far cry from concrete alleys and midnight cold. On the wall, a single frame drew the eye a display of his newly awarded Navy Cross, flanked by his recovered Purple Hearts and service ribbons. Reed had tracked them down, aided in a storage unit, long ago sold off when Mason had nothing left to hold on to. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. He opened the door. It was Olivia, not Judge Langston. Just Olivia, holding a small wooden box in both hands. "May I come in, Sergeant Quinn?" she asked gently. He gave her a tired but sincere smile. "Just Mason, please." "Then it's just Olivia," she said, stepping inside. They sat across from each other in the quiet space. Between them lay 20 years of silence, loss, and something slowly finding light again. "I brought something," Olivia said, opening the box. Inside, a bundle of old letters tied with twine, the pages yellowed at the edges, worn by time but clearly cherished. "They're from Jenna," she said. "She wrote us almost every week while deployed. This one..." She handed it to him carefully. "This one was written the day after you saved her." Mason's fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the page. The handwriting was bold, sharp, just like he remembered. "Mom, Dadn't worry about the news. I'm okay, thanks to one of our NCOs. Gunnery Sergeant Quinn did something yesterday I still can't wrap my head around. When we were ambushed, he moved through fire like it wasn't even real. He refused to leave me, even when I ordered him to. Said, 'No Marine gets left behind.' Not on my watch." Mason's voice caught on that last line. Olivia leaned forward slightly. "She mentioned you in almost every letter after that," she said quietly. "Said you were the Marine she looked up to. Said she wanted to be like you." Mason looked away, his voice low. "She was a damn good officer. Still young, but she gave a damn about her people. That's rare." Olivia looked around the apartment, letting the quiet settle before she spoke again. "After Jenna died, I went to law school. This," she gestured gently around them, "the Veterans Court Program, the Housing Initiative. It all started because of her letters, because of what she wrote. About the system, about the people. It forgets." Mason shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. "I'm not a hero," he said softly. "I just did what needed doing." "That's exactly what heroes always say," Olivia replied, offering a warm, worn smile. She paused, then added, "There's one more thing you should know." Mason looked up. "The day she died," Olivia said carefully, "Jenna was leading a mission to track insurgents targeting civilian routes. She volunteered for it. In her last letter, she said she wanted to live up to your example." The sentence struck Mason like a round to the chest. He exhaled slowly, pain sharpening behind his eyes. For 2 decades, He'd carried the weight, wondering if saving her had been a delay of the inevitable, if it had even mattered. She didn't die because of you, Olivia said, reading his thoughts with the ease of someone who knew sorrow's exact shape. She lived how she did because of you. They sat in stillness, two souls stitched together by war, loss, and duty. Outside, the city softened under falling snow, white flakes drifting gently across windows, silencing even the streets. Finally, Mason spoke, his voice almost a whisper. For years, sleeping on sidewalks, I kept thinking no one remembered. Like none of it mattered anymore. Olivia nodded slowly. But it did. It did to Jenna, to every Marine you carried, and to me. She stood, and before leaving, placed a hand on his shoulder. Jenna used to say the measure of a Marine isn't what he does in front of a crowd, it's what he does when no one's watching. You lived that, Mason, even when the world forgot. Mason stood, taller than he had in years. No medals, no applause, just a calm strength returning to his frame. A man reclaimed by remembrance. Someone remembered my name, he said quietly. After all this time, someone remembered. And in that moment, something long fractured began to mend, not just in Mason Quinn, but in every soul the system had left behind. Some heroes save lives, and then spend a lifetime waiting for someone to save theirs. But sometimes, dignity doesn't need glory. It just needs to be seen.